Scientists have just announced that there is a lake under the surface of Mars. But why are they so sure about this discovery? Let's look at the evidence together. We know that Mars is an extremely dry planet. In fact, it's so dry that we haven't found any evidence of life there yet. However, just because we don't see lakes and rivers and oceans on the surface of Mars doesn't mean that water isn't present. After all, most of Earth's water isn't on the surface either. It's in the ground as groundwater or frozen in ice caps at the poles. So scientists began searching for signs of subsurface water on Mars, and they think they may have found a big one. The researchers say that there could be a gigantic subglacial lake located beneath the icy south pole of Mars. What's more, they say this lake could contain twice as much water as all of the water in all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a pretty bold statement and an amazing discovery if true. So let's look into how they arrived at these conclusions. They were able to do this with the help of the Mars Express orbiter that has been studying the red planet since 2003. One of its instruments is called the Mars Orbiter Laser Altimeter, or MOLA. As its name suggests, it uses lasers to measure elevations on the Martian surface. And this is how MOLA works. A laser sends out a pulse of light which bounces back after hitting an object. By measuring the time between sending the light and receiving it back, MOLA can determine how high that object is, above or below a reference level. This is exactly how we know that Mount Olympus on Mars is 21 kilometers high. MOLA measured the time it took for the light pulse to bounce back from the top of the mountain and compared it to the time it took to bounce back from a reference level. Since Mount Arrogance is 21 kilometers high, the gravitational pull on the mountain is slightly weaker than it is at the reference level. This means that the laser would take a little longer to receive the pulse back from the mountain because the light would have to travel further. So going back to our subglacial lake, scientists analyzed data collected by MOLA and noticed that the topography around the South Pole has a strange bump. They say that this anomaly could be explained by the presence of a huge underground lake. This region has a diameter of about 40 kilometers, and it's located at an elevation of 4 kilometers above sea level. The researchers say that their discovery could help pave the way for future robotic and human explorers looking for life on Mars. According to the researchers, the weight of the water in the subglacial lake would cause part of the surface above it to collapse, creating a large low area. Using radar data collected by previous orbiters, the team showed that the low area is indeed caused by a thick layer of water ice that has collapsed. In addition, the shape of the depression suggests that it was created by a large volume of liquid water. It's already known that there's a lot of water ice underneath the south pole of Mars. Scientists had previously spotted what they called a weird shadow on Mars using the Mars Global Surveyor satellite. At first, scientists thought that this dark patch was a new type of rock on Mars. But when the seasons changed and they looked again, the strange marking was still there. Only this time it was covered in ice. The researchers then realized that the only explanation for this dark spot getting covered in ice was that it was a lake. And as if this discovery wasn't amazing enough, they also made another astounding finding. While looking at this subglacial lake, they also spotted a crack. This crack appears to be a vertical fracture in the ice sheet through which water from the lake below has erupted onto the surface. If the water from this lake reaches the surface, it could potentially sustain life. And scientists believe that this process could be similar to how geothermal energy sustains the deep sea vents here on Earth. These vents are located miles below the ocean's surface and don't rely on sunlight to support life. Instead, they thrive thanks to chemicals spewed from the Earth's core. On Mars, however, there would be no need for geothermal energy to sustain life. Scientists suggest that the water from the lake itself could be enough. That's because the water from this lake has been protected from the atmosphere of Mars for billions of years. Because of this, it would be rich in molecular oxygen and methane. The combination of these two compounds could be used as fuel and would essentially allow life to exist in a closed environment. In fact, scientists even discovered some conditions that would make this subglacial lake a perfect place for life to flourish. Because the lake is situated beneath the South Pole, it will always be surrounded by ice. This means that any liquid water on the surface will freeze almost immediately, and that any gas released from the lake will also be trapped. This would prevent any substance from entering or leaving the lake, making it a closed ecosystem. In other words, any life forms living in this lake won't need to worry about getting food or oxygen from outside. It will essentially be able to sustain itself. Furthermore, the lack of sunlight and the abundance of methane would protect the water from UV radiation. Here on Earth, ultraviolet radiation from the sun breaks down water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. On Mars, however, this wouldn't happen. This means that the lake won't gradually evaporate over time. Of course, while these conditions would be very suitable for life, it doesn't necessarily mean that life would actually evolve. Just because all the pieces are there doesn't mean that everything would just fall into place. However, if life did evolve in this lake, it would be unlike any life that we know of today. Any living thing in this subglacial lake would have had to adapt to complete darkness, low temperatures, and high pressure. All of these factors would affect things like metabolism, movement, and maybe even the ability to reproduce. In fact, this has already happened on Earth. Deep sea creatures, for example, have evolved to live in near total darkness. Some of them don't even have eyes. Instead, they use other senses to hunt, such as electroreception, which allows them to detect the weak electric fields given off by prey animals. And on the surface of the Earth, we have cave-dwelling creatures that have evolved to survive in complete darkness. Take, for instance, the cave-dwelling fish in Texas. These fish live 300 meters underground where there is no light, so they have no need for eyes. Instead, they use their other senses to find food and avoid being eaten. They also have no need for color, so they're transparent. The interesting thing about these fish is that scientists believe they all descended from the same ancestral population. Over time, these populations adapted to their surroundings and evolved into the many different species that we see today. This means that any life on Mars would likely be very different from life here on Earth, despite sharing a common ancestor. So what do you think? Is there life on Mars? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.